Good afternoon. This presentation will share a little bit about our experience going into an elementary school with an embedded classroom. This presentation is by Dr. Julia Lopez Robertson and by myself. I'm Dr. Jennifer Morrison. We're both with the University of South Carolina. And this presentation is going to share with you our experiences from the spring of 2020. Where we had embedded classroom of early childhood literacy into an elementary school. I'm going to begin by providing an overview of what we're doing. We're looking at 4 different intersecting concepts that occurred within this particular space. The first was that I was a liaison for the Professional Development School Partnerships, which meant I was part of the university who went into an elementary school and supported the people there. The IMC, the Immersed Methods course, model of teacher education. We looked at early childhood education, best practices, and then we also looked at culturally sustaining pedagogy as well. We're going to explain what we did pre-COVID. We're going to explain what we did post-COVID. We're going to provide student, teacher, and parent responses as well, and we'll talk about implications and discussions. Afterward, there will be a live Q&A. So to begin with, our intersecting concepts, we really looked at 4 things and how they came together in this particular experience. The first was that we had an existing PDS partnership between the elementary school and the university. And what this PDS partnership did was it provided a space for there to be back and forth fluidity between the district, the school, and the university in terms of supports for interns. I was there as a liaison to work with the teachers, to work with the school in any ways and capacities that I possibly could. There was also support for instructors. We also had pre-service teachers that were there on a regular basis. We had resources from the university and school districts that went into these schools, and we vetted mentor teachers. So that really became a community that helped to support teachers who are just moving into the field. With that, in that experience, because I was a liaison, one of the things that my school told me, my school's administration said, is we really would love to have an embedded classroom, love to have a class taught on campus. And fortunately, I was engaged in a conversation with Dr. Lopez Robertson, and she needed a place for her class, and I had a place for her class. So it ended up being a wonderful place for us to be able to come together. We looked into the IMC model of teacher preparation, which really is about embedding and supporting teacher practice at the point of use, that there becomes fluidity between the coursework that's being taught and the work that is teaching, so that these pre-service teachers are getting authentic approximations of what teaching experiences are like, and it helps them to be able to make that transition better. We then also looked at what do we know about early childhood education that's going to make this positive. And we looked at how do we model reading practices for fluency and prosody. We looked at the idea that we really needed to provide hands-on reinforcement of concepts and ideas, not only for the children who were being taught, but also for our students who were the pre-service teachers. And what we wanted to really set up was situations that had one-on-one or small group interactions. Then additionally, we thought about how can we make this culturally sustaining pedagogy? How can we teach the culturally sustaining pedagogy within this structure that already exists? So we did a number of things. We said we looked at being able to use multicultural and multilingual texts for modeling that culturally sustaining pedagogy, and we did that in a couple of different ways. We really wanted to focus on the linguistic and cultural needs of the children that were in the classes that we were using. And then we wanted to make sure that we had opportunities for the students to see themselves in that literature, ways that they were going to be able to do so. So we really saw this as a coming together of 4 different models and ideas to effectively address teacher preparation. Since we did this in the spring, we did in fact have COVID as a issue that came into play. Beforehand, we were really in our groove. We spent 3 hours on site on Tuesdays where the pre-service teachers were paired with one first grader. In some situations, they had 2 first graders. And they spent about an hour to 75 minutes with that child once a week. I, as well as Doctora, did observations. We walked around and we looked at the small groups that were being implemented, and we were able to take notes. Sometimes we gave feedback at that moment. Other times we were able to wait until afterwards, and we can kind of provided feedback for everybody. We would say, hey, here's something that we saw, or here's something that we're seeing that's happening, and we were able to make changes right then and there in terms of the pre-service teachers' implementation of their early childhood literacy. We also looked at the lessons ahead of time. Dr. looked at those, and she was able to make comments and say, hey, you might want to try this or consider this. So she was able to really help them to formulate the things that they were doing with the kids. And then those lessons took in applications of learning from the class. So for instance, if they were learning in class about a particular strategy, then they were asked to implement that within the lessons with their first grader. That is one prong of what we were doing. The second prong is that to really emphasize that idea of the culturally sustaining pedagogy. Dr. would read to the children for about 15 minutes. She did a read aloud through an author study of Yuri Morales' work, and she would read to them about 15 minutes before they went to lunch. And it was really beneficial because the kids really enjoyed the read to by somebody who's different than their classroom teacher. Now, of course, things changed. Things did not stay the same of what we expected. So post-COVID, we had to think about, well, what's going to happen? We had to think about what were the things that were impacting us and what could we still do. We looked at a major loss of time. The loss of time was a big issue because it began with our university extending our spring break for 1 week. So we lost a week right there. Then we ran into the issue where even though schools were still open, the districts were not allowing guests into schools. And our classes, Dr. and myself, even as the liaison for the school, we were considered to be guests and were not allowed into the schools at that time. Within about 9 days, the schools went fully virtual, and the teachers had to have time in order to prepare, and the schools still had their spring break. So we lost another 2 weeks within the period of time there. So we really ended up having only about 2 weeks of possible interaction time that existed after COVID became an issue. So we adjusted to moving the interactions between our pre-service teachers and our children online. The classes that Dr. taught moved to a virtual space. And we looked at what were some ways that we might be able to still have interactions in a virtual way. Because the school district was still trying to distribute different kinds of technologies and devices, and because teachers were scrambling to try and get things taken care of and to get it done quickly, we really tried to look at things that were not synchronous. So one of the things that we were able to do was that our pre-service teachers were able to take all of the materials that they had from the first half of the semester of their interactions with their first grader, and they were able to create books for their children that were about them, and they were so excited about this. It was a really wonderful thing. So the implications for this, as we really looked at how did the embedding of this class, as well as embedding culture sustaining pedagogy into the IMC methods class, the early childhood methods class, how did that impact each of the different groups of people that were involved in this particular structure? And so when we considered it, we broke it out. We first of all said, let's think about how did this impact our pre-service teachers. The first is that they had recursive positioning and authentic practice of culturally sustaining pedagogy. This was really important because what we know from research is that culturally sustaining pedagogy is something that has to be practiced. It is something that needs to be done repeatedly and recursively. Otherwise, those pre-service teachers go through a great deal in order to be able to get to their own classrooms. And we want to make sure that there is traction, that they are holding on to the learning that they get at the university level. And in order to do that, we really have to recursively position them as culturally sustaining practitioners. And so they were able to get that by week after week doing some work within this. And so that became reinforced, and they were able to internalize some of these ideas and concepts that they can carry forth into their own classrooms. Additionally, they were able to get ongoing, specific, and personal feedback on their performance as teachers, which meant that that was helping them to become reflective practitioners as well. Then we looked at our classroom teacher and what she was able to gain out of the experience. First of all, was that she had the professional growth opportunity. That she was able to see these things that were happening within the embedded classroom, and she was able to translate some of that into her own practice. And she was able to build on the things that the pre-service teachers were doing with the first graders, and she was able to make that part of her daily practice as well. So she was able to gain a good deal of professional growth through this experience. Um, Dr. and I, as university instructors, we were able to really look at the theory and the ideas that we see play out, that we study, and we were able to see them play out within those practitioner spaces so that we can see how is it that what we are teaching and what we are helping our pre-service teachers to learn, what does that look like when it gets played out within these real spaces in which they could be operating. And it helps to inform our practice to make sure that what we are doing is really doing the very best that we can in order to prepare our pre-service teachers. And then finally, for the schools, it really allowed them access to the high quality future teachers because they were able to see what are these teachers about, who is doing well, and it really was giving them an opportunity to be able to say, hey, we really want to have these people as being our teachers within our school. It also gave them access to new ideas and theories because as they were seeing these things being implemented within their classrooms, they were able to say, hey, that's a really great idea, and carry that into other parts of the school. So really, this embedded practice affected everybody within the school.
Hello, everyone. My name is Julia Lopez Robertson. I'm professor of education at the University of South Carolina, where I work with Jennifer. I want to thank you for taking this time to join us on Saturday, especially, and in the Day of Early Childhood Education for NCTE. And I hope that you learn a lot as you engage with us in our presentation. So to give you a little bit of background, we are going to be talking about my methods course and my reading methods course with my pre-service teachers and what we did pre-COVID and what we did after COVID, right? And it seems like now we're going to be talking about all things pre and post-COVID. And we're not post-COVID, we're in the middle of COVID still, but pre-COVID, things that happened in the semester before COVID came along. So my class represents the demographic of most of the predominantly white institutions. I had in the class one white male, one African American female, one Asian American female, myself as a Latina instructor, and 16 white females. The children with whom we worked represent more of a diverse demographic, which is what we find in most public schools. We had 14 African American children, 4 white children, 3 Latino children, and an African American teacher. So you can see how my class and their class represents the stats for teachers as well, where we have majority white teachers teaching diverse children. So part of the class, a big part of the class is the embedded experience, where my students are partnered with one of the children in the school that we work in a program I call Amiguitos, which means directly translated little friends. In Spanish, we add the ito or ita to the end of words as a term of endearment and to show love and affection. It is not meant to show essentializing or to show condescension. It is totally just for out of love that we use those terms. And the program is called the Amiguitos program. As a part of the program, my students work with one child, their amiguito, who they're partnering with the entire semester. As part of the classwork that they do, they have to prepare a lesson every week because they work with the children every Tuesday during class. They write a lesson plan based on the child's interest that is founded on a children's picture book. So it's a picture book is the core of the lesson, and then what they do with it, their activities, whether it be word study, predictions, creating sentences, anything to do with the language arts, but they're based on a book that's based on the children's interest. And they do these, so the lessons last about 45 minutes to an hour, and they work on them every week. And then we come together as a group and we do a debrief where we talk about what happened in the lesson, and I'll get into that in a moment. But one of the important things that we discussed in class was book selection, right? And what I noticed after like the first 2 or 3 weeks of class was that my students' books were not representing the children in our classroom at all. And I noticed that there was a lot of Dr. Seuss and Eric Carle, which I love them both. They have their place in the curriculum. And in our class is not that place. I wanted them to explore diverse literature that represented the children with whom we were working. But rather than tell them this, because we know that there would be no value in me just telling them this, I want them to discover this on their own. So a part of the class that we have also is we have a current event where the students every week they present on a current event. Something happening in the field of education in this country, in our state, in this city, anywhere, in the world even, as long as that they can connect it to education somehow. So for this week, I found this one that came out of School Library Journal, and it was about an initiative that Barnes and Nobles in their Manhattan store had decided to do as a celebration for African American History Month. And the initiative came when they were answering this question: what if your favorite literary characters reflected the diversity of America? And their response to that was they're going to take the covers of the classics and turn them into diverse peoples, right? So we have Treasure Island, Moby Dick, as you can see here, and Wonderful Wizard of Oz, that they have diverse covers on the outside, right? Um, as you can imagine, there was a lot of pushback, and it ended up that they didn't do this release at all because of the pushback that they received. And here we have one from David Bowles, who's a Latino author, Latinx author, and he writes, imagine a Black girl, a Latina, who picks up a copy of The Secret Garden and sees this beautiful Black girl on the cover and gets the book and is all excited about it and reads it and realizes it was about a white girl who has a racist family and racist beliefs herself. So we had a great discussion in class on the cover versus what's on the inside, but then also on how do we know how to pick these books if we don't represent the cultures of the children in our classrooms, which is we had a really great, rich discussion on that. So I wanted them to think about, as I said, for them to find out about their own book selection by searching what they had done. So I gave them this piece of paper and I had them fill this all out. And I had them gather their lesson plan. So I think that they each had about 3 or 4 lesson plans. List all the books they use and the authors, the settings, the characters, secondary characters, were they people or animals, and then think about the demographics: gender, language, culture, race, age, ability. And the last thing was, so after filling all this out, what did you notice? So they each of my students filled it out based on their lesson plans. They got into small groups and talked about what they had discovered from doing this analysis on their books, and then we came together as a whole class and shared out. And one of the things that they kept on saying was, wow, we're not choosing very diverse books. And the question was, well, why is that? And to which some answered, it's what we're comfortable with, it's what we know, it's hard to do things that we don't know. Um, and it was funny because when we were talking about what they had found in there out of this little study that they did was their findings matched what the CCBC found that's depicted here in this graphic, that most of the books that they use represented white characters, 50% of them. And you can see here, and this is based on Redeemed Things Bishop, Mirrors, Windows, and Doors, where we want books that represent our children, where they can also see other cultures and learn about others, right? So the little boy here, the white child, it's 50% of the books represent him. He's got a disco ball because he can see himself everywhere. The animals represent 27%, right? So combined, that 77% of the books are about white people or animals. And then you look on the left-hand side, you have 1% for American Indians, 5% Latinx, 7% Asian Pacific and Asian Pacific American, and then you have 10% African American. So that total is less than the total of the animals. So my students were like, wait a minute, we reflect that data because we were choosing books about animals and white people over anyone else. And then the question became, how do we know what books to choose if we don't belong from that culture? So we talked about this in another class session, not the same one. Look at the context, right? Who wrote the book? What's it teaching? What's its message? When you look at who wrote the book, is it someone who's inside the culture or is it someone who's outside the culture? And there's a whole discussion on cultural authenticity and who has a right to write. We had that discussion, a small one, but we had that discussion. Then look at the illustrations. Do the images in the book represent something that's offensive? Are they accurately illustrated? Do they match the story? And when you think about now, we're coming into Thanksgiving, we think about, well, we have the Pilgrims, we have the American Indians. The American Indians are always pictured with feathers and loincloth and look like savages. Well, we don't want those books for our children because that's not what they look like now. right? That's then, and this is now. We want them to know that these people exist today, right? And it's not, they don't all look like that. They don't look like that. They wear their ceremonial clothing for ceremonies, not when they're going out and spending every day, right? Then look at the messages. What kind of message is the book showing? Is it a book that's showing, is it sharing? Are they overcoming something? Because when you think about books with diverse characters, many times the minoritized person in the story is overcoming something and the white person comes to their rescue, right? So look for those things. If it's a female character, is she a damsel in distress? Keep an eye out for all those things. Look at the words. If it's showing another language, is it showing it in a mocking way, right? Like if it's Spanish, are we saying pencil O, book O, tent O, where it mocks the language, or is it an authentic use of the word? Are the people, the characters named as savages? Are they lazy? You know, how are they looking? Are they silly? Are they bashful? What the representations look like? We had a really good discussion about this as well, because I wanted them to choose books that were good books for their children, but know and have tools for how to find those books. Because their question was right. How do we know how to choose a book when we're not Latinx? We're not Asian American. We don't know what to look for. So this gives them a guide and helps them choose those books. The next thing that I had them do on another day, not the same day, was to look at these questions. And these come from Freeman and Freeman's article on connecting students to culturally relevant texts, right? It's an oldie, but it's a goodie. And I had them look at all these things and answer these questions. And my goal was for the next time to sit with their amiguito and answer these same questions, right? Because I want them to look at it on their own. Are there characters in the story like in your family? Have you experienced anything like this? Could this story take place this year? Like I was saying with the American Indians, we don't want to make American Indians only exist in the time of the Pilgrims way back then. They're alive and well today. We need to see that they are, right? How do often you read stories like this? We had a good discussion. Most of my students answered that they were just like the stat represented. Because I had 16 white students and one white male, most of the stories represented them. So again, it's having my own students research and see these things on their own rather than me just tell them, look, you're doing terrible book selection. You're only choosing these things that are not good for your students. But why are we choosing what we choose? How are we choosing what we choose? How do we change that? And having them do their own research. So my goal, I said, was to have them do this with their children, the amiguitos later, but COVID came and we weren't able to do that. So this was kind of left hanging that we couldn't finish, but at the least, my students were able to see that they had to do better book selection and why and how to do that. Another component of my work with the children was an author study in which I engaged the children in the classroom. So Ms. Grady, the first grade teacher, gave us time on Tuesday morning to work with the children for an hour and 15 minutes sometimes. And then I read to them after lunch every Tuesday. And I read books, as you can see here, I focused on Shushi Morales, who's my favorite author. And the first one I read was when I introduced myself was Nino Wrestles the World, because it was my favorite book. And the Latino children saw their language, their culture. And our non-Latino children were still able to connect with the story, right? Because there are things that happen with young children and that they can all relate to because it has families. They were seeing different kinds of families in the stories. They were seeing things that they do, items that they know, and all recognizable to them. And my goal with the author study was for all those things to happen, and then for them to begin to notice things and make connections across the curriculum, not just in the time that I was reading to them. So after when COVID happened, the media specialist sent the teachers this email, and Ms. Grady sent me the email, and this email, and it says, and I was explaining what we plan to do after COVID, which I'll talk about in a moment. But she says, it sounds great. The students will be thrilled. The media specialist sent this link out, and she says, I was excited to see the artwork of an admired author and illustrator shown at the top of the page. This is an excerpt from Yudi Morales' book. So my teacher, even though she wasn't part of my lessons, she was in the classroom because she couldn't leave me there alone. And she could have done whatever she wanted. I told her, take this time to do nothing or, grade or whatever you want to do. I've got the kids for 30 minutes. Thank you for giving them to me for 30 minutes. She was paying attention and being a part of what it was and noticed, the artwork. So after COVID, once COVID hit the university, we were on spring break. We were given another spring break and had, given time to make new lessons. We were not allowed to go back into the schools because the schools were not allowing outsiders to come in. And I still wanted us to do something. So what we ended up doing was I was thinking of what can we do to give the children and to give my students some kind of closure with the experience that we had done. And what we ended up doing was we made books in Book Creator. Each of my students made a book for their children on Book Creator. And if you haven't seen Book Creator, you should really go on it. It's a wonderful site. But my students gathered all their photographs that I had taken. They gathered the photographs, they gathered the materials that they had for the children, and they laid it all out. And then they made a chronological order of what they did with the students. They had to include photographs, artifacts of the work that they did together, the titles and pictures of all the books that they used, and just tell the story of the time with the child. And each of the books, of course, look different based upon the students. And I want to show you one right now. And this is the one that Eve made for Kelvin. And I'm not going to show you though, I'm not going to play the whole thing. But the nice thing about Book Creator is that you can, of course, you input your data, but you can also read it to them. So here's how she read.
Hey Kelvin, it's Eve from Pontiac. I hope that you and your family are staying safe and healthy right now. Here's a book about you and me and our experience together at Pontiac. It's called My Amiguito and Me, and I wrote it just for y'all. I hope you enjoy.
So that was the first page. And like I said, I'm not gonna play the whole thing in the interest of time. But here you see them sitting in the library. We were in the library or in a classroom on the floor at tables in between bookcases. They were just spread out doing things. And during this time, I was walking around taking pictures, but also peeking in on lessons and taking notes on what on my students' teaching, because we later debrief on what was happening in the lessons. So she talked about each thing. Here's what you learned about him. And then Eve made it from the first day all the way up until the last day we were together, included some of his artifacts. And as you press the microphone, you can hear her reading the whole thing to him. So for him, he could read the text on his own, but he could also hear her voice. And it was a nice way to give closure because, as I said, we didn't have closure. We just kind of ended and that was it. We were gone. Here's what they were sharing at the end of our class. So at the end of each session that we had with the students, one child of theirs, the amiguito and a USC student, stood up at the front and were the ones that directed the traffic, so to say, for the sharing of the ending of the time that we had together. And you can see she has all the books that they read, all of his artifacts. And at the very end, she lists all the books, and you can see how she began with animals and then changed. We went back to dinosaurs for 1 minute, but the book selection got better as time passed, right? And the students were able to see that on their own, which is more powerful than me pointing it out to them. And the last note that she wrote to the child, and then that was the end of the book. So what it was, it provided, as I said, the closure for my students and for the Pontiac students. And it was also a way to keep them connected and also see that the time that they had together, what the end result was of what they did together. And here we have, I sent Miss Grady the links, and then she got the links out to the families. The families read and engaged in the books with the children, and then it all got sent back to school. So here we see 2 pictures of children, and you can just see how much they're loving, experiencing the books. One of the moms wrote, London absolutely loved her book from Courtney. She smiled and giggled the whole time. Thank you for sending it to her. Noah said, thank you. He really enjoyed the surprise. And then Kyrie is a child on the bottom right. And he said, he told the mom to write the email, thank you for writing this book for me. Make sure you tell her it's from Kyrie. So he wanted my student to know that he was the one sending this message, even though his mom was the one that typed it. And then on the left-hand side, you can see the little girl. You can just see the joy in her face as she was reading the book that her, USC teacher sent to them. Ms. Grady wrote that my read aloud and my time with the students, with our partner time together, the students were excited on Tuesdays that they're able to work with their pre-service teachers and appreciated my read alouds. She tremendously appreciated how the experience strengthened their reading engagement skills and strategies. And for my students to hear that, their 45-minute lessons once a week had an impact on the children's reading and writing in their classroom. Because they may think, well, I'm only with them 45 minutes. What possibly impact can this have? And it had great impact, as we see from what the teacher said. This speaks to the importance of embedded classrooms, right? Because if we It gives our students, the pre-service teachers, time to practice and play with, right? We can say play with the theory that they're reading and talking about in our class with the real actual child, right? And they can make mistakes, right? They can make errors, they can make miscues in their teaching because they have their professors walking around taking notes on what's going on. And then later on, we debrief in the class and they learn from their errors, right? They learn from those miscues and they can do it better when they do it the next time, right? Because they're in a supportive environment. So after they've taught the lesson, we come back and we debrief, they write their field notes, and then they talk and they think, pair, share with the partner on what they did. And then as a whole class, they come together. Jennifer's there with us as well. She points out things that she noticed in our lessons. I point out things I noticed in our lessons, and we want them, for next week, don't forget to do, XYZ. And it's all connected. So just like we want the children to see how the curriculum is connected, we want our students to see that their embedded experience is connected to what goes on in our classroom and also in the children's classroom when they're not with us. And her email shows that the time that they spent with them did help them with that. The embedded experience for us also helps my students, my pre-service teachers, work with children who are diverse as far as language and culture in their communities. And we know that in culturally sustaining pedagogy, it's built on an asset-based lens, right? And that's what my class is built on. We want to celebrate all the wonderful things that these children bring with them to school. They've been living life for 6 to 7 years by the time they get to the first grade. They know language, they know culture, they know things that they've done with their families. Their funds of knowledge are things that we have to build on in class, right? We don't leave them at the door. We bring them with us in class and we build on those with the children in our classroom. My students learned how to do that or learned how to begin doing that by talking with the children, finding out what their interests are, and then finding picture books that connect to those interests. And then also finding picture books that are accessible to the children as far as language, culture, and community. While having them understand that yes, you want to choose books that reflect the language and culture in that classroom. You also want to widen it and have them be available and learn about other languages and cultures, not just their own. So the embedded experience gives them time to practice all these things and to learn why they're doing it and to be able to justify it. So that when they become classroom teachers and they're hit with curriculum, when they're handed something, they can just say, well, I can follow what the curriculum is. I want to embed my own things in there because I know what's good for children. I know we have to base things on their language and culture and funds of knowledge. So it's giving them the tools to be able to make curricular decisions and know why they're making those curricular decisions. Um, that is all I have. I thank you again for spending your time with us. It means a lot that you took time out of your Saturday to spend time with us, especially knowing that you could have been doing any number of things. Again, thank you so very much. Jennifer is going to close us up with um, some closing thoughts, some reflection on what was going on, and then we welcome you to ask us questions. Thank you very much again.